Michelle Carter was not just any passenger boarding Flight 723 from New York to London. She was a woman who commanded respect wherever she went, a self-made black CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company known for her relentless drive and sharp decision-making skills. Her life revolved around excellence, and she expected nothing less from the world around her. Whether it was in the boardroom, where she negotiated million-dollar deals, or at high-end restaurants, where chefs crafted exclusive dishes for her, Michelle had grown accustomed to being treated with dignity and professionalism. On this particular day, Michelle stepped onto the luxurious Boeing 777 with an air of calm confidence. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished surfaces, plush leather seats, and soft ambient lighting that promised comfort and indulgence. As she settled into her seat by the window, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This flight wasn't just another business trip. It was an opportunity to unwind after weeks of grueling work. She planned to use the long journey to catch up on emails while enjoying the gourmet meals the airline boasted about in its advertisements. First class was supposed to be an oasis of relaxation and luxury, and Michelle anticipated every moment of it. The crew greeted passengers warmly as they boarded, their smiles practiced yet inviting. For Michelle, everything seemed perfect so far. Attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, ensuring luggage was stowed securely and offering complimentary drinks before takeoff. A glass of sparkling water arrived promptly, accompanied by a polite inquiry about whether she needed anything else. So far, so good. But deep down, Michelle knew better than to let appearances fool her entirely. Life had taught her that things were not always what they seemed, especially when it came to how people treated her because of the color of her skin. Still, she allowed herself to relax slightly as the engines roared to life and the plane taxied down the runway. The anticipation of fine dining and uninterrupted productivity filled her thoughts. Little did she know this flight would become one of the most unforgettable experiences of her life. Not for the reasons she expected, but for something far more profound. As the aircraft soared above the clouds, Michelle opened her laptop and began reviewing documents for an upcoming project. Hours passed smoothly until the time came for dinner service. The flight attendants started making their way through the cabin, presenting menus to each passenger. Michelle scanned hers carefully, weighing her options. Filet mignon sounded tempting, but she opted for the vegetarian pasta dish instead, thinking it might pair well with the red wine she intended to order. When the attendant finally reached her row, Michelle placed her request with a polite smile, expecting nothing less than perfection. Minutes later, her meal arrived. At first glance, disappointment washed over her face. What sat on the plate bore little resemblance to the elegant description on the menu. Overcooked noodles swam in a watery sauce, topped with wilted herbs that looked like they'd been sitting out too long. There was no sign of the vibrant flavors or fresh ingredients promised in the brochure. Michelle stared at the dish, wondering if this was some kind of mistake. Surely this couldn't be the standard for first-class dining. She decided to give the staff the benefit of the doubt and called over the same flight attendant who had taken her order earlier. "Excuse me," Michelle said calmly, gesturing toward the plate. "I think there may have been an error with my meal. Could you please check with the chef to see if they can prepare it again?" Her tone was measured, her words chosen with care. She didn't want to come across as difficult or unreasonable. After all, mistakes happened, even in the best circumstances. To her surprise, the attendant barely glanced at the food before responding. "Ma'am, we're very busy right now. This is what we have available," the attendant replied curtly, avoiding eye contact. Michelle blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Was this person really dismissing her concern without even looking at the problem? Unwilling to let it go, Michelle tried again. "I understand you're busy, but this doesn't meet the quality I'd expect in first class. Can someone else confirm this?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the rising frustration bubbling inside her. This time, the attendant's expression hardened. Without another word, they turned away and disappeared down the aisle, leaving Michelle stunned and fuming silently. It wasn't just the poor quality of the food that bothered her. It was the dismissive attitude she encountered. In her experience, such behavior often stemmed from deeper biases, ones she had faced countless times throughout her career. Yet here she was, thousands of feet in the air, dealing with the same old prejudices disguised as indifference. Determined not to let this slide, Michelle made a mental note to address the issue properly once the initial shock wore off. Something told her this wouldn't be the last interaction she'd have with the crew, and she intended to make sure they remembered it. Despite the unsettling exchange, Michelle forced herself to focus on her work, hoping the rest of the flight would improve. But as the hours ticked by, her mind kept circling back to the incident. It gnawed at her, not because of the bad food itself, but because of what it represented. A pattern of neglect and disrespect she had fought against her entire life. Growing up, Michelle had learned early on that success wouldn't shield her from prejudice. She had worked twice as hard as her peers to prove herself, breaking barriers and shattering stereotypes along the way. And now, here she was, still facing the same uphill battle, even in places where she should have felt valued. As a customer, determined to document the situation, Michelle discreet cameo-style filmed interactions with the staff using her phone. She captured footage of the unappetizing meal, zooming in on the soggy noodles and dull herbs. Then she recorded snippets of her attempts to speak with the crew, capturing their dismissive body language and clipped responses. Each clip added weight to her growing case, ensuring she had undeniable proof of the treatment she received. What truly solidified her resolve, however, was witnessing how differently others were treated. Later that evening, a white male passenger seated nearby complained about his steak being overcooked. Within moments, a fresh replacement appeared, accompanied by profuse apologies from the attendant. Michelle watched silently, her jaw tightening as the contrast became glaringly obvious. Here was a man receiving immediate attention and resolution for a minor issue, while her legitimate concerns were brushed aside without a second thought. It was infuriating, and infuriatingly familiar. By the time the plane began its descent into Heathrow Airport, Michelle had drafted a detailed email outlining every aspect of the incident. She attached photos and videos as evidence, determined to hold the airline accountable for their failure to provide equitable service. Her tone in the email remained professional but firm, emphasizing both the poor quality of the food and the discriminatory treatment she endured. As the wheels touched down, Michelle felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She knew this wasn't just about one bad meal. It was about standing up for herself and demanding better. And she was ready to fight for it. As the plane descended toward Heathrow Airport, Michelle Carter felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Anger, frustration, and determination coursed through her veins. But above all, she felt clarity. This wasn't just about a plate of overcooked pasta or dismissive flight attendants. It was about something much bigger. It was about being treated as though her voice didn't matter, as though her concerns were less valid because of who she was. And Michelle refused to let that slide. Once the plane landed and passengers began disembarking, Michelle deliberately lingered in her seat. She wanted to ensure most people had left before approaching the crew. While others hurried to collect their belongings and exit, she calmly gathered her documents, ensuring everything was in order. Her laptop was safely tucked away, her phone charged, and her printed email ready to be handed over. Every detail mattered. She knew she needed to present her case clearly and professionally if she hoped to make an impact. When the senior flight attendant approached her with a rehearsed smile, thanking her for flying with them, Michelle cut straight to the point. "I need to speak to your supervisor immediately," she said, her tone firm but composed. Without waiting for a response, she handed over the printed copy of her complaint letter. The attendant hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Michelle's assertiveness. For a moment there was silence, a tense pause where the attendant seemed unsure how to proceed. Finally, after glancing at the document, they nodded and gestured for Michelle to follow them. The airline's ground manager was stationed in a nearby lounge reserved for premium passengers. As Michelle entered the space, she took note of its sleek design, plush chairs, glossy tables, and a coffee station stocked with expensive teas and pastries. Despite the luxurious surroundings, Michelle remained focused. This wasn't the time to get distracted by superficial comforts. When the ground manager greeted her, Michelle wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "I experienced unacceptable treatment during my flight," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. She laid out the details step by step: the subpar quality of the food, the dismissive attitude of the crew when she tried to address it, and the stark contrast in how another passenger's complaint was handled. To drive her points home, she showed the photos and videos she had captured, highlighting not only the poor meal but also the dismissive body language of the staff. Each piece of evidence reinforced her argument, leaving little room for denial. The DU ground manager listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. At times, they appeared uncomfortable, shifting in their seat as Michelle recounted the events. When she finished speaking, the room fell silent. Michelle leaned back slightly, giving the manager a moment to process what they had just heard. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "This isn't just about one bad meal. It's about accountability and respect. If you want loyal customers, you need to treat everyone equally. And I didn't feel respected today." The manager nodded, slowly, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Carter, I assure you we take these matters very seriously," they said, their tone apologetic yet cautious. "We will investigate this thoroughly and ensure steps are taken to prevent such incidents in the future." But Michelle wasn't satisfied with vague promises. She had seen too many companies issue empty apologies only to repeat the same mistakes later. She needed action, immediate, tangible consequences. "I appreciate your willingness to look into this, Michelle," replied, her voice unwavering. "But I expect more than just an investigation. I want accountability from the individuals involved. Their behavior reflects poorly on your entire organization, and it needs to be addressed now, not weeks from now." Word of the incident spread quickly within the airline's headquarters. Executives scrambled to contain the potential fallout, knowing full well that Michelle's status as a prominent CEO meant this could escalate into a public relations disaster if mishandled. News of the confrontation reached senior leadership teams, sparking urgent meetings late into the night. They reviewed the footage Michelle provided, analyzed passenger feedback forms, and even interviewed other travelers who were on the same flight. What they found confirmed Michelle's account. The crew had indeed failed to uphold the airline's standards of service. In a bold move, the airline decided to terminate the entire cabin crew responsible for the flight. The decision sent shockwaves throughout the company, with some employees questioning whether the punishment fit the crime. Critics argued that firing everyone might have been excessive, especially since not every crew member interacted directly with Michelle. Others, however, supported the decision, seeing it as a necessary step toward accountability. After all, the airline prided itself on delivering exceptional customer experiences, and this incident had exposed glaring cracks in their system. Meanwhile, Michelle took matters into her own hands. Still simmering with frustration, she turned to social media to share her story publicly. In a post accompanied by screenshots of her complaint email and selected clips from her video footage, she described her experience in detail. The caption read, "When you pay for first-class service but receive third-rate treatment, let's talk about accountability, respect, and equality in customer service." Within hours, the post went viral. Comments poured in from around the world, with thousands of users expressing outrage and solidarity. Many shared similar stories of feeling marginalized based on race, gender, or socioeconomic background. Influencers and activists rallied behind Michelle, amplifying her message and calling for systemic change. Hashtags like accountability, inaction, and respect for all began trending, drawing attention to broader issues of bias and discrimination in industries reliant on customer interaction. The airline issued a formal apology shortly thereafter, acknowledging the shortcomings in their service and pledging to implement stricter training programs for employees. They emphasized their commitment to diversity and inclusion, promising to hold regular workshops aimed at eliminating unconscious biases. Additionally, they offered Michelle lifetime complimentary upgrades to first class along with a generous travel voucher. However, Michelle declined the offer, explaining that meaningful change mattered more to her than perks. "If you truly want to make amends, She wrote in her response, "Focus on creating policies that protect all passengers from unfair treatment. That's the kind of legacy worth building." As the days turned into weeks, Michelle's story continued to resonate far beyond the confines of social media. Journalists reached out for interviews, eager to learn more about her perspective and the steps she planned to take moving forward. Rather than retreating from the spotlight, Michelle embraced the opportunity to advocate for change. She partnered with advocacy groups dedicated to addressing racial bias in customer service industries, lending her influence to initiatives aimed at promoting equity and fairness. One project she spearheaded involved collaborating with experts to develop a certification program for businesses committed to inclusive practices. Companies participating in the program would undergo rigorous audits to ensure their policies aligned with principles of equality and respect. Those meeting the criteria would earn a seal of approval, signaling to consumers that they prioritized fair treatment for all. Michelle's efforts earned widespread recognition, solidifying her reputation not only as a savvy business leader but also as a champion for justice. Awards and accolades followed. But for Michelle, the real reward lay in knowing she had sparked conversations that might lead to lasting change. People began to see her not just as a successful CEO, but as someone willing to stand up against injustice even when it came disguised as a simple meal mishap. Through it all, Michelle remained steadfast in her belief that no one should tolerate disrespect, regardless of context. Her actions reminded everyone that standing up for oneself isn't just about seeking justice. It's about inspiring others to do the same. Sometimes firing back, at least metaphorically, is exactly what's needed to spark real change. Michelle Carter's story didn't end with the viral post or the airline's apology. In fact, it was only the beginning of a much larger movement that would ripple across industries and spark conversations about equality, respect, and accountability. What started as a single incident of poor service on a first-class flight had now transformed into something far greater, a catalyst for change. The days following her social media post were a whirlwind for Michelle. Her phone buzzed nonstop, with notifications, messages of support from strangers, interview requests from journalists, and even invitations to speak at conferences about diversity and inclusion. At first, Michelle wasn't sure how to handle the sudden influx of attention. She had shared her experience not to gain fame, but to shed light on an issue she believed needed addressing. Yet, as the responses poured in, she realized the power of her platform and the responsibility that came with it. One particular message stood out among the rest. It was from a young woman named Jasmine, who described herself as a flight attendant for a different airline. In her note, Jasmine explained how she had faced similar biases during her training. "They told us to prioritize certain passengers over others," Jasmine wrote. "We weren't supposed to say it outright, but we all knew what they meant. White, wealthy travelers got special treatment, while everyone else, well, you know." The message hit Michelle hard. It confirmed what she had suspected all along. This wasn't just about one bad crew or one isolated incident. This was systemic. Determined to dig deeper, Michelle began reaching out to experts in the field of customer service and workplace discrimination. She spoke with sociologists, psychologists, and industry insiders, piecing together a clearer picture of the problem. What she discovered was both eye-opening and disheartening. Many companies, especially those in hospitality and travel, operated under unspoken rules that perpetuated bias. Employees were often trained to cater to high-value customers based on stereotypes rather than actual behavior. These practices weren't written down anywhere. They were ingrained in the culture, passed down quietly through generations of workers. Armed with this knowledge, Michelle decided to take action. She couldn't single-handedly overhaul every company's policies, but she could start by holding the airline accountable and encouraging others to do the same. She drafted an open letter addressed not just to the airline, but to the entire travel industry. Titled, "A Call for Change, Respecting Every Passenger." The letter outlined specific steps companies could take to combat bias and ensure equitable treatment for all customers. Among her recommendations were mandatory diversity training, programs, anonymous feedback systems for passengers, and independent audits to monitor compliance. The letter gained traction almost immediately. Industry leaders, advocacy groups, and everyday consumers praised Michelle for her boldness and vision. Several airlines publicly committed to adopting some of her suggestions, while others promised to review their existing policies. Even competitors of the airline involved in the incident reached out to congratulate Michelle on her efforts, acknowledging the importance of transparency and fairness in their line of work. But Michelle didn't stop there. Inspired by the overwhelming response, she turned her focus toward creating long-term solutions. She partnered with a team of researchers and activists to launch an initiative called Equal Skies, aimed at promoting inclusivity in the aviation industry. The program focused on 3 key areas: education, accountability, and community engagement. Under the education pillar, Equal Skies developed workshops and online courses designed to help employees recognize and overcome unconscious biases. These sessions weren't just lectures. They included interactive exercises, role-playing scenarios, and real-life case studies to make the lessons stick. For example, participants might be asked to imagine themselves in Michelle's shoes, dealing with dismissive staff members despite paying top dollar for premium services. By putting themselves in someone else's position, they gained a deeper understanding of how their actions could affect others. Accountability was another cornerstone of the initiative. Michelle worked closely with legal experts to draft guidelines for reporting and addressing discriminatory behavior in the workplace. One of the most innovative aspects of the program was its use of technology. Passengers could download an app that allowed them to submit anonymous feedback about their experiences, whether positive or negative. Airlines participating in Equal Skies were required to respond to these reports within 48 hours, ensuring timely resolution of any issues. Additionally, the app featured a rating system that highlighted companies excelling in customer service equity, giving consumers the power to choose businesses aligned with their values. Finally, Michelle emphasized the importance of community engagement. She organized town hall meetings and panel discussions where passengers, employees, and executives could come together to share their perspectives. These events weren't just talk. They led to actionable outcomes. For instance, after one such meeting, a major airline announced plans to diversify its leadership team, citing the need for representation at all levels of the organization. Another company pledged to partner with minority-owned businesses for catering and supply contracts, furthering economic opportunities for underrepresented groups. As Equal Skies gained momentum, Michelle found herself traveling more than ever, not for business meetings, but to spread her message. She visited schools, universities, and corporate offices, delivering speeches that combined personal anecdotes with data-driven insights. Her talks resonated deeply with audiences because she never shied away from sharing her vulnerabilities. She spoke openly about the challenges she faced as a Black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated industry. She recounted moments when she doubted herself, wondering if speaking up would cost her professional relationships or tarnish her reputation. But she also reminded listeners that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of. One of her most memorable appearances was at a global summit on diversity and inclusion. Standing on stage before thousands of attendees, Michelle delivered a speech that brought many to tears. "When I boarded that flight," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion, "I expected nothing more than a comfortable journey. Instead, I received a lesson, one that reminded me of the work still ahead of us. Discrimination doesn't always come in loud, obvious forms. Sometimes it's subtle, a glance, a tone, a refusal to listen, and sometimes it's served on a plate of soggy pasta." The audience erupted in applause, standing to show their support. Michelle smiled, knowing she had struck a chord. But she also knew the fight was far from over. Changing mindsets and dismantling systemic biases wouldn't happen overnight. It would require patience, persistence, and collaboration. Still, she felt hopeful. If one woman's experience could inspire so many to demand better, imagine what collective action could achieve. In the months that followed, Michelle continued to push boundaries. She collaborated with filmmakers to produce a documentary highlighting stories of discrimination in customer service, from hotel clerks ignoring Black guests to retail workers following Latino shoppers around stores. The film exposed uncomfortable truths about modern society. Yet, it also offered hope, showcasing individuals and organizations working tirelessly to create a fairer world. Through it all, Michelle remained grounded. Despite her growing influence, she stayed true to her roots, prioritizing authenticity over accolades. She often reminded herself why she had started this journey, to ensure no one else had to endure the same indignities she faced. Whether addressing a packed auditorium or chatting with a stranger on social media, she carried that mission with her, letting it guide her every move. By the end of the year, Michelle's name had become synonymous with advocacy and resilience. People looked to her not just as a CEO, but as a leader willing to challenge the status quo. Her story proved that even the smallest acts of defiance could ignite change, if you dared to stand your ground. And Michelle? She stood tall, ready, to keep fighting until equality became the norm, not the exception. Michelle Carter's journey of advocacy wasn't just about holding an airline accountable. It became a mission to redefine how industries treated their customers, employees, and communities. As her efforts gained momentum, Michelle found herself at the center of a growing movement that transcended borders and industries. Her story had struck a nerve, and people everywhere were eager to join her in pushing for meaningful change. One of the most unexpected outcomes of Michelle's activism was the way it resonated with everyday workers in the service sector. Flight attendants, hotel staff, restaurant servers, and retail clerks began reaching out to share their own experiences of bias, not only as recipients of discrimination, but also as perpetrators who felt trapped within flawed systems. Many admitted they had been complicit in unfair practices because they feared losing their jobs or facing backlash from management. These confessions painted a complex picture. Discrimination wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was systemic, ingrained so deeply into workplace culture that even well-meaning individuals couldn't escape its influence. Michelle listened intently to these stories, recognizing the need for a two-pronged approach: empowering employees to speak up while simultaneously holding companies accountable for fostering inclusive environments. She knew that true progress required addressing both sides of the equation. With this realization, she expanded Equal Skies to include resources specifically designed for frontline workers. The program introduced confidential helplines where employees could report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. It also provided legal assistance for those willing to testify against employers perpetuating harmful practices. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, hundreds of workers came forward with accounts of mistreatment, ranging from subtle microaggressions to outright hostility. One flight attendant recounted being reprimanded by her supervisor for spending too much time assisting elderly passengers of color, while another described being pressured to upsell luxury items exclusively to white travelers. A hotel concierge shared how he was instructed to prioritize English-speaking guests over non-English speakers when booking reservations, regardless of availability. Each story added weight to Michelle's argument. The problem wasn't isolated incidents. It was a pattern woven into the fabric of customer service industries. To amplify these voices, Michelle launched a podcast titled Breaking Bias. The show featured interviews with experts, activists, and ordinary people sharing their perspectives on inequality in various sectors. Episodes ranged from discussions about racial profiling in airports to debates over gender disparities in tipping cultures. What set Breaking Bias apart was its conversational tone. Michelle approached each topic with curiosity and empathy, creating a safe space for honest dialogue. Listeners praised the podcast for its ability to blend education with entertainment, making complex issues accessible to a wide audience. One particularly impactful episode featured Jasmine, the flight attendant who had initially contacted Michelle after her viral post. During the interview, Jasmine opened up about the emotional toll of working in an environment where bias was normalized. "You start doubting yourself," she confessed. "Am I imagining things? Am I being too sensitive? But then you see it happen again and again and you realize it's not your imagination, it's real. Her words resonated deeply with listeners, many of whom reached out afterward to thank her for speaking out. The success of Breaking Bias inspired Michelle to take her advocacy offline as well. She organized regional workshops across the United States and Europe, bringing together industry leaders, employees, and consumers to brainstorm solutions. These events weren't lectures. They were collaborative forums where participants worked in small groups to identify problems and propose actionable strategies. For instance, one group developed a prototype for a digital platform that allowed passengers to rate airlines based on inclusivity metrics like crew diversity and complaint resolution times. Another team created a toolkit for managers to evaluate hiring practices and eliminate biases during recruitment. As Equal Skies grew, so did its impact. Major corporations began approaching Michelle to consult on their diversity initiatives, seeking her expertise in navigating delicate conversations around equity. Some companies genuinely wanted to improve, while others sought to polish their public image in response to mounting pressure. Michelle didn't shy away from calling out performative gestures, often reminding executives that real change required more than lip service. Posting a statement on social media isn't enough, she told one CEO during a meeting. If you're serious about inclusion, show me your data. Show me your policies. Show me what you're doing to ensure every employee feels valued and respected. Her no-nonsense attitude earned her respect, and occasionally criticism, from corporate leaders. Some accused her of being overly harsh, arguing that transformation took time and couldn't happen overnight. Michelle acknowledged the validity of this point but countered that urgency was critical. Yes, change is gradual, she said during a panel discussion. But that doesn't mean we should accept mediocrity in the meantime. Every day someone is treated unfairly is a day too long. We have to demand better, for ourselves, for our children, and for future generations. Despite the challenges, Michelle remained steadfast in her commitment to driving progress. She understood that systemic change wouldn't come easily, but she also recognized the power of collective effort. Grassroots movements sprang up in cities around the world, inspired by Michelle's example. In London, a group of hospitality workers formed a coalition to advocate for fair wages and anti-discrimination policies. In New York, students at a culinary school launched a campaign to promote cultural sensitivity training for chefs and restaurateurs. Even tech companies, traditionally slow to address social issues, started incorporating inclusivity metrics into their product designs. Michelle's influence extended beyond professional circles, touching the lives of countless individuals who saw themselves in her story. Parents used her speeches as teaching tools to explain the importance of standing up against injustice. Teachers incorporated breaking bias episodes into their lesson plans, encouraging students to think critically about privilege and prejudice. Social media users adopted hashtags like #StandWithMichelle and #Equal Treatment for All, turning personal anecdotes into calls for action. Through it all, Michelle stayed humble, never forgetting the roots of her journey. She often reflected on the irony of it all. A plate of poorly made pasta had sparked a global conversation about equality. Yet she also recognized that life's most profound lessons often came from the smallest moments. Sometimes it's the little things that wake us up, she wrote in a blog post. A rude comment, a dismissive glance, a soggy noodle. These moments remind us that dignity isn't negotiable, and neither is respect. By the end of the year, Michelle's efforts had yielded tangible results. Several airlines revamped their training programs, incorporating modules on unconscious bias and cultural competency. Hotels introduced blind review processes for job applications to reduce hiring disparities. Retail chains implemented stricter guidelines for customer interactions, ensuring consistency in service regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status. While there was still work to be done, the progress was undeniable, and Michelle played a pivotal role in making it happen. Looking back on everything she had accomplished, Michelle felt a mix of pride and gratitude. She had started as a single voice speaking out against injustice, but now she stood alongside thousands united in pursuit of a common goal. Her story proved that courage, determination, and authenticity could inspire others to demand better, not just for themselves but for everyone. And though the road ahead remained long, Michelle knew she had already made a difference. After all, sometimes firing back, even metaphorically, was exactly what was needed to spark real change. As Michelle Carter's advocacy work continued to grow, so did the ripple effects of her efforts. What began as a personal experience of mistreatment on a flight had evolved into a global movement that challenged industries to rethink their practices and values. Yet for Michelle, this wasn't just about achieving milestones or ticking off goals. It was about creating lasting change that would endure long after she stepped away from the spotlight. She understood that true progress required not only addressing immediate issues, but also laying the groundwork for future generations. One of the most significant developments in Michelle's journey came when Equal Skies caught the attention of policymakers. Lawmakers from various countries reached out to learn more about her initiatives, intrigued by how grassroots movements could drive systemic reform. Some invited Michelle to testify before legislative bodies, asking her to share insights on combating discrimination in customer-facing industries. Her testimony often included real-world examples, like the dismissive flight attendant who ignored her complaint or the hotel clerk who refused service to a black family, making abstract concepts tangible and relatable. Michelle's presence in these formal settings was both powerful and humbling. Dressed in tailored suits and armed with data-backed arguments, she commanded respect in rooms filled with seasoned politicians and bureaucrats. Yet, she never lost sight of her roots. During one congressional hearing, a senator asked her what motivated her to take such bold action. Michelle paused, then responded simply, "I'm doing this because I want my nieces and nephews to grow up in a world where they don't have to fight twice as hard to be treated fairly. If we can fix these problems now, maybe they won't have to." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring lawmakers to draft bills aimed at promoting equity in public accommodations. One proposed law required businesses to undergo annual audits to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination policies. Another mandated diversity training for all employees in federally regulated industries. While these measures faced opposition from lobbyists representing corporate interests, Michelle remained undeterred. She rallied supporters through petitions, rallies, and social media campaigns, ensuring the voices of ordinary people were heard, loud, and clear. In addition to influencing policy, Michelle turned her focus toward education, a cornerstone of sustainable change. She believed that teaching young minds about equality and empathy could prevent biases from taking root in the first place. To this end, she collaborated with educators to develop curriculum materials designed for schools. These resources included lesson plans, interactive activities, and storytelling sessions that encouraged students to reflect on fairness and inclusion. One particularly popular initiative was called the Respect Project. Aimed at middle schoolers, the program used role-playing exercises to help children understand the impact of discrimination. For example, students might be divided into groups and given different privileges based on arbitrary criteria, like shoe color or favorite subject. Over time, they observed how unequal treatment affected group dynamics and individual self-esteem. The exercise culminated in discussions about fairness, encouraging kids to think critically about why everyone deserves equal treatment. Teachers praised the Respect Project for its ability to spark meaningful conversations among students. "It's amazing to see how quickly kids grasp these concepts," said Sarah Thompson, a sixth-grade teacher in Chicago. "They start noticing unfairness not just in hypothetical scenarios but in real-life situations too. It gives them the tools to speak up and make a difference." Meanwhile, Michelle continued to expand Breaking Bias, using the podcast as a platform to highlight stories of resilience and innovation. One episode featured a tech entrepreneur named Marcus, who had developed an app to combat racial profiling in ride-sharing services. Another showcased a hotel chain that implemented anonymous feedback systems to address guest complaints without bias. Each story reinforced Michelle's belief that solutions existed, they just needed amplification. The podcast also served as a space for difficult conversations. In one memorable episode, Michelle interviewed a former airline executive who admitted to overseeing discriminatory practices during his tenure. "We told our staff to prioritize high-income customers," he confessed. "At the time, it seemed like good business sense. But looking back, I realize how harmful it was, not just to those being excluded, but to the integrity of our brand." His honesty sparked heated debates among listeners, some applauding his transparency while others questioned whether apologies were enough. Through these dialogues, Michelle emphasized the importance of accountability. "Acknowledging past mistakes is a step in the right direction," she said during the episode. "But true redemption comes from taking concrete actions to prevent those mistakes from happening again. Words matter, but actions matter more." As her influence grew, Michelle faced new challenges, including criticism from unexpected quarters. Some detractors accused her of overstepping, arguing that her crusade against bias bordered on extremism. Others dismissed her efforts as performative activism, claiming she cared more about headlines than actual change. While these accusations stung, Michelle chose to respond with grace and determination. She reminded herself that every movement attracted skeptics and that staying focused on her mission was the best way to silence doubters. To counteract negativity, Michelle leaned on her support network, a diverse group of friends, colleagues, and allies who shared her vision. They celebrated small victories together, whether it was securing funding for a new project or seeing a company adopt one of Equal Sky's recommendations. Their encouragement kept Michelle grounded, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Perhaps the most rewarding aspect of Michelle's journey was witnessing the tangible impact of her work. Businesses that had once resisted change began embracing inclusivity as a core value. Airlines revamped their complaint resolution processes, ensuring swift responses to passenger concerns. Hotels introduced diversity quotas for leadership positions, recognizing the importance of representation. Even retail chains committed to sourcing products from minority-owned suppliers, fostering economic opportunities for underrepresented communities. These transformations weren't perfect. There were still setbacks and areas for improvement, but they represented progress. And for Michelle, progress was worth celebrating. She often reminded herself that change was rarely linear. It ebbed and flowed, requiring constant vigilance and effort. Still, each step forward brought hope, proving that collective action could dismantle even the most entrenched systems. By the end of the year, Michelle stood at the forefront of a cultural shift. Her name had become synonymous with courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice. People looked to her not just as a leader, but as a symbol of what was possible when determination met opportunity. Whether addressing a packed auditorium or chatting with a stranger on social media, Michelle carried her mission with humility and purpose. Reflecting on everything she had achieved, Michelle felt a profound sense of gratitude. She knew the road ahead would remain challenging, but she also knew she had already made a difference. Her story proved that sometimes standing up for oneself wasn't just about seeking justice, it was about inspiring others to do the same. And if one woman's courage could ignite a global movement, imagine what millions united in pursuit of equality could achieve. After all, firing back, at least metaphorically, was exactly what was needed to spark real change. As Michelle Carter's journey of advocacy reached its peak, she found herself at a crossroads. The movement she had sparked, what started as a single voice speaking out against injustice, had grown into something far greater than she could have imagined. Yet she knew that sustaining momentum required more than just rallying cries and policy changes. It demanded a shift in mindset, a cultural transformation that embedded equity and respect into the very fabric of society. For Michelle, this meant looking beyond immediate victories and focusing on building a legacy that would endure for generations. One of the most significant milestones in Michelle's mission came when Equal Skies was recognized globally as a beacon of progress. The initiative earned prestigious awards, including honors from international human rights organizations and business councils. At a gala ceremony in Geneva, Michelle accepted an accolade for her contributions to advancing inclusivity in the aviation industry. As she stepped onto the stage to deliver her acceptance speech, the audience erupted in applause, a testament to the impact of her work. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This award isn't mine alone. It belongs to every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. It belongs to those who stood up and said, 'Enough is enough.' And it belongs to those who are still fighting for a world where respect isn't conditional, it's universal." Her words resonated deeply, not only with the attendees but with millions watching the live broadcast. Social media lit up with hashtags like Michelle Carter Legacy and I Respect for All as people shared how her story had inspired them to challenge biases in their own lives. For Michelle, this moment wasn't about personal glory, it was validation that her efforts were making a difference. Despite the recognition, Michelle remained grounded, knowing there was still much work to be done. She understood that systemic change took time, and that victories needed to be safeguarded against complacency. To ensure Equal Skies continued thriving, she established a foundation dedicated to funding grassroots projects focused on equality and inclusion. The Michelle Carter Foundation provided grants to small organizations working to dismantle bias in local communities, from mentoring programs for underrepresented youth to workshops teaching bystander intervention skills. The foundation also launched a scholarship program aimed at empowering young leaders passionate about social justice. Recipients received financial support to pursue education in fields like sociology, law, and public policy, along with mentorship opportunities from seasoned activists. One recipient, a 22-year-old college student named Aisha, wrote a heartfelt letter thanking Michelle for believing in her potential. "Your story taught me that no matter how hard things get, I can stand up for what's right," Aisha wrote. "You've shown me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite fear." Reading letters like Aisha's reminded Michelle why she had embarked on this path in the first place. Her goal wasn't just to create change, it was to inspire others to become agents of change themselves. By investing in the next generation, she hoped to ensure that the fight for equality wouldn't end with her. While Michelle's professional achievements garnered widespread acclaim, her personal life underwent subtle yet profound transformations. Friends and family noticed a renewed sense of purpose in her demeanor. Gone was the frustration and exhaustion that had once weighed her down. Instead, she radiated confidence and optimism. Even her nieces and nephews, whom she often spoke about, during interviews began showing signs of her influence. They peppered her with questions about fairness and equality, eager to understand the concepts she championed so passionately. During one family dinner, her youngest niece, Maya, asked, "Auntie Michelle, does standing up for yourself mean you never get scared?" Michelle smiled, setting down her fork before answering. "No, sweetie, it doesn't mean you're never scared. In fact, sometimes I feel terrified. But standing up means doing what's right even when it's scary. Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about moving forward anyway." Maya nodded thoughtfully, then grinned. "I want to be brave like you someday." Michelle chuckled softly, brushing away a tear. Moments like these reinforced her belief that the smallest conversations could plant seeds of change. If she could instill values of fairness and resilience in the children around her, perhaps they would carry those lessons into adulthood and pass them on to future generations. As the years passed, Michelle's influence extended beyond industries and borders, touching nearly every corner of the globe. Grassroots movements inspired by Equal Skies sprouted in countries as diverse as India, Brazil, and South Africa. Activists adapted her strategies to address local issues, proving that the principles of equity and respect transcended cultural barriers. In Kenya, a group of women entrepreneurs launched a campaign to promote fair hiring practices in corporate offices. In Australia, Indigenous leaders partnered with airlines to implement training programs highlighting the importance of cultural sensitivity toward Aboriginal passengers. Each success story served as a reminder that Michelle's vision was universal. It belonged to everyone willing to embrace it. Yet Michelle never lost sight of the challenges that remained. Discrimination persisted in subtle forms, evolving to evade detection. Algorithms used in hiring processes favored certain demographics over others. Retail stores continued profiling customers based on appearance, Even schools struggled with implicit biases in disciplinary actions. These lingering issues underscored the need for vigilance and innovation. Michelle frequently emphasized that progress wasn't linear. It was a continuous cycle of learning, adapting, and improving. 2. Stay ahead of emerging challenges. Michelle collaborated with tech experts to explore cutting-edge solutions. Artificial intelligence, once criticized for perpetuating bias, became a tool for combating it. Together, they developed software capable of analyzing customer service interactions for signs of discriminatory behavior. Airlines and hotels piloted the technology, using it to identify patterns of unfair treatment and address them proactively. Though imperfect, these innovations represented a step toward leveraging technology for good. By the time Michelle celebrated the 5th anniversary of Equal Skies, the movement had transformed into a global phenomenon. Cities declared Equal Skies Days to honor its impact, while schools incorporated its teachings into curricula. Businesses proudly displayed certifications awarded by the foundation, signaling their commitment to inclusive practices. Most importantly, individuals from all walks of life embraced the message that respect and dignity were non-negotiable rights. Reflecting on her journey, Michelle felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced countless obstacles, from dismissive flight attendants to skeptical executives, but each hurdle had strengthened her resolve. Along the way, she had learned invaluable lessons about resilience, empathy, and the power of collective action. Her story proved that change didn't require perfection, it required persistence. That courage wasn't about grand gestures, it was about consistent effort. And that firing back, whether metaphorically or literally, could ignite revolutions. In her final keynote address at an international summit, Michelle left the audience with a poignant reminder. Change begins with us. It starts with the choices we make every day, the way we treat others, the causes we support, the voices we amplify. None of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. So let's keep pushing forward, together. As the crowd rose to their feet, applauding thunderously, Michelle allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought back to that fateful flight, the soggy pasta, the dismissive glances, the burning frustration, and smiled. What had once seemed like a minor inconvenience had become the catalyst for a lifetime of advocacy. And though the road ahead remained long, she knew she had already made a difference. After all, sometimes firing back, at least metaphorically, was exactly what was needed to spark real change.